In this lesson, we're going to keep extracting validation logic in a separate module. Let's start with base select component, go down to the validator function. Let's extract this piece of code. Here we validate options of select box element. So we can create a new function with the name of validate select options and create this function in our validators module. And this way we're cleaning up our components code even further. Inside of validators.js file, let's export new function with the name validate select options. Then we're gonna paste that validator markup we just got, and those options that we have to validate will receive as a param. Let's name it options. And now take a look at this part of code. What does it actually do? In fact, it also does validation, but validation of individual item in this options array. So this can be a good candidate to extract into separate function as well, just to follow separation of concern principle and make our functions do one specific thing. In here we're going to pass reference on the function we will create right now, is select option valid. It will be another validator, which would declare down here, where we paste that code which will validate individual select option elements. We will receive an object that we should validate as a param. Let's destructure this object right here and extract value and label properties. These properties are already used inside of body of this function, so all we have to do is to return the result of this whole expression. And now let's copy over import of one validation function, place this import inside of base select component, and import validate select options validator that we have just created. And now let's check if our validation of select options works as expected. We're gonna modify array which stores select options. It is this options array inside of timeline item component. Instead of using number for the value property, we're gonna use string. And then this options array will be passed as a property to base select component. And this base select component is supposed to validate our property options. And in the browser we can see that indeed we get some warnings in console. And the reason why we receive so many is because we have several select box elements on the page. And this warning is printed for every select box element, 24 times to be specific. So our new validation function works. Let's review the changes we have done to options array in here and extract one more validator from the timeline component. In here we validate timeline items prop. So this function can be extracted into validators module. And by the way, within this validator, we already use one validator function called isTimelineItemValid to validate individual objects from timeline items array. And now we're gonna create another validation function to validate array of such objects, which we will extract into validators file. Let's create this function right below the isPageValid function, call it validate timeline items, and export. We will receive an array that we have to validate as a param, timeline items, and then this timeline items array will be iterated over by using every method. And for every object inside of this array, it is going to call another validation function is timeline item valid. So this way every object of timeline items array will be validated. And even though we use this is timeline item valid validator inside of another validator, and both these validator functions belong to the same module, we still have to export both these validators from this module, because they are both used directly inside of Vue components. So let's import correct validation function name inside of the timeline component. Here we should import validate timeline items. And finally, let's check if the validation logic which is supposed to validate individual timeline item object from timeline items array works properly. Firstly, let's find the place where array of timeline items objects is generated. It happens inside of this generate timeline items function, where we on every loop iteration add one object into timeline items array, and each such object for now contains only one property with the name hour. And if we try to assign invalid value for an hour, for example 25, then right away our validation will fail and Vue will let us know about it in the console, saying that custom validator check failed for prop timeline items. So we have verified that our new validators also work as expected. Let's revert this change we have made to our property, and let's finish this lesson.